In 1834 Kentucky, the macabre mystery of the twins that not even science can explain. In March of 1834, in Mason County, Kentucky, an event took place that local newspapers mentioned only once and never returned to again. Why? That was how a brief column began in an old issue of the Maysville Eagle, dated April 3, 1834. I found it buried in the County Historical Society's archives, tucked between yellowed sheriff's correspondence and faded taxpayer lists. The tiny column, only 6 short lines, reported a strange occurrence at the Cartwright family farm, accompanied by the tragic death of 2 infants. And nothing more. No names, no details, just a vague warning. The cause of the incident remains a mystery, and local residents refuse to testify. That dry little clipping became the starting point of my investigation. Mason County in the 1830s was a quiet rural stretch along the Ohio River. Farms and tobacco fields sprawled across the hills, while the occasional steamboat docked at Maysville's port. People lived close to the land, and even closer to each other. Everyone knew everyone. A stranger arriving was an event in itself, and a tragedy all the more so. Which made it stranger still that the death of 2 infants at once left behind almost no trace in memory or record. I went to the county archives and began leafing through the old registers. In the birth records for February 1834, I found this line: Robert and Thomas Cartwright, twins, born February 11. A few pages later, in the death register dated March 27, both deceased, cause undetermined. No doctor's notes, no mention of illness. Normally, one would expect words like fever, croup, or scurvy, but here, silence. On my way into Maysville, I stopped at several roadside taverns and asked old-timers what they remembered. Most only shrugged, but one gray-haired farmer named Abner Jennings, who claimed he had been 7 years old that spring, said something that sent a chill up my spine. They were born with the same cry, but they died at different hours, and between their deaths, no one could separate them. I asked what he meant. Jennings turned away, tossed a log onto the fire, and muttered, "You'd best not know. The folks who were there are long in the ground, and rightly so." The Cartwright house still stands today, dilapidated but intact. I arrived there early one fog-draft morning. The roof sagged, the windows were boarded up, but the front door hung slightly ajar, as if inviting me inside. Within, the air reeked of damp and mildew. The floorboards groaned under my steps. In a corner sat an old cradle. Its blue paint peeling, a dark patch on the floor resembled the outline of a person, as though someone had once stood there for hours without moving. I raised my lantern and examined the walls. Beneath one window, carved into the wood, were 2 identical symbols, a circle with a cross inside. They didn't look like children's scribbles, more like something ritualistic. County records gave me the parents' names, Elijah and Sarah Cartwright. Elijah was a veteran of the War of 1812, a farmer who owned 40 acres. Sarah was a Virginian by birth. No other children were mentioned in any official document, though the couple had lived on that land for at least a decade. But in the handwritten journal of Dr. Jonathan P. Howard, preserved in the archive, I found a curious note. February 11th, birth of unusual twins to S. Cartwright. Symmetry remarkable. Recommended examination in Lexington. Parents refused. Day by day, the case drew me deeper. At first, I believed it was nothing more than a forgotten rural tragedy, but the further I dug, the more strangeness surfaced. For instance, the Church Council's April 1834 minutes contained this line: after the incident at the Cartwright farm, it was decreed to remove all mirrors from the house and to shutter the windows until year's end. Why would the church interfere in the life of a private family, and why mirrors? That evening, I visited the Methodist Church in Maysville, where the old record books were kept. Pastor Randall Moore, an elderly man, agreed to show me the archives. We descended into the basement where dusty ledgers sat under glass. He drew out the relevant volume and lowered his voice. "Don't repeat this to folks. Some things are better left forgotten." The minutes were long and detailed. They noted that on the morning after the second child's death, the family summoned the pastor and 2 witnesses to examine the house and conduct a prayer of cleansing. They also recorded that both bodies were found not in the cradle, but on the floor, their hands intertwined as at birth. At the end came a chilling line. Witnesses affirmed that the shadows of the bodies did not align with the direction of the sunlight. The next morning, I met Mary Lawson, archivist of the County Historical Society. She brought me a folder of old newspaper clippings. One anonymous piece read, "The event at the Cartwright farm has shaken the county. Many believe it to be a sign from heaven, punishment, or trial. The infants cried so loud at night that they were heard across the neighboring hills." I asked Mary where such stories came from. She sighed. "My grandmother told me Sarah Cartwright had stopped leaving her house even before the children died. The shutters stayed closed, no one was allowed in. Only the creak of the cradle was heard in the silence. And sometimes, at night, as if someone sang." That same day, in Maysville's library, I uncovered a letter from local judge Horace Banks to the county sheriff dated March 29, 1834. I insist the house be searched once more. Rumors that the twins died an unnatural death disturbed the congregation. Several women claimed to have seen lights flickering in the nursery window on the night the second infant passed. These documents only multiplied the questions. For weeks, I sought medical records that might explain what had happened. Finally, in the Lexington Library, I found a note in the Journal of the Society of Physicians. Dr. William Lowry wrote, "The Cartwright case draws interest due to the extreme identicality of the twins. Even after death, according to witnesses, the complexion of both did not change for several hours, despite the heat." Lowry wanted the bodies transported to Lexington for examination, but as he reported, the parents categorically refused, burned the cradle, and packed their belongings. When I returned to the Cartwright farm a second time, the sun was already leaning toward dusk. Mist drifted low across the fields, and the cries of cicadas grew intolerably shrill. Again, I entered the house, this time climbing to the attic. There, beneath a blanket of dust, I found a small box. Inside lay two tiny infant garments, ground with age. On both, embroidered in fading thread, was the same symbol, a circle with a cross. And then I thought I heard a faint creak, as if a cradle rocked somewhere. I hurried downstairs. No one. The wind rattled in the empty shutters. The following morning, I spoke with a woman named Louisa Harper, now over 80. She agreed to meet me on the porch of her home. She said, "My father was there. He saw the first boy stop breathing. Sarah screamed, and the second twin thrashed so hard they could hardly hold him. Then he fell asleep, but his eyes never closed. He just lay there, staring at the ceiling till morning." I asked what happened next. Louisa crossed herself. The next day, they found him dead, but his face looked like it was smiling. My father swore people don't die like that. By this point, the story had grown darker. Too many coincidences, too many hints of things that could not be dismissed as superstition. I traveled to Flemingsburg, where the 1830s court books still survive. There, I found an entry. Elijah Cartwright appeared to confirm the burial of his two sons. Interment, conducted without priest, at family's request. Why without a priest? In a devout county, that bordered on sacrilege. Back in Maysville, I lay sleepless in the inn. A phrase from the church minutes echoed in my head. The shadows did not align with the light. What could that mean? Mistaken perception? Or something that truly defied explanation? The next day, I resolved to spend a night inside the Cartwright house. The inn was too comfortable, while the answers lay too near. I brought with me a bedroll, lantern, paper, and ink. Locals tried to dissuade me, but I insisted. By evening, the fog returned to the valley, thick and wet. I built a small fire outside to keep the damp at bay, then settled inside the dark house. The stench of mildew clung to the air. I unrolled my bedding in the parlor, not far from the cradle. Near midnight, I awoke to a peculiar sound. At first, I thought mice, but the noise was rhythmic, like a faint tapping. I turned my lantern toward the nursery. The cradle was rocking. Draft? But the doors and windows were shut. Then I noticed on the floor 2 moist footprints, small, bare, childlike. They trailed from the cradle to the doorway and vanished at the threshold. I followed them outside. The ground was dry, no trace of damp. When I returned, the cradle stood still, but on the wall beside the carved circle and cross, a dark patch had appeared, like moisture spreading. I touched it, dry. Yet when I withdrew my hand, the mark seemed larger. Toward dawn, I heard a low murmur, like infant babbling. It came from the corner of the room, yet no one was there. Cold sweat broke across my brow. I wrote in my journal, 0340, sound resembling speech, words incomprehensible, repeated. After 10 minutes, silence. With the sunrise, the house looked once again like any other abandoned ruin. Later that morning, I went back to Mary Lawson and told her about the strange sounds. She paled and produced yet another document, a letter from Reverend George Fletcher, dated May 1834. I advised Elijah Cartwright to abandon the house and move in with relatives, but he refused. Said he could not leave the children alone, yet by then they were already buried. The phrasing shook me. How could he not leave the children if they were dead? Did it mean Elijah heard the same things I had? Determined, I sought out a living descendant of the Cartwrights. In town records, I discovered John Cartwright, great-grandson of Elijah's brother. The old man lived a couple miles south of town. He greeted me warily, but agreed to talk. I wrote down his words verbatim. My grandmother said they were kept together all the time, from birth. They could never be parted, not even for a minute. And when the first died, the second screamed so loud the windows shook. Folks said if no one touched him, he would have cried until the end of the world. I asked what he meant by touched. John fell silent, then whispered, "They held him down until he stopped." After that meeting, I returned to the house, though everything in me rebelled at the idea. This time, I pried up floorboards in the nursery. Beneath one, deep in the dust, I found a small copper crucifix and a scrap of cloth embroidered with the initials RTC, Robert and Thomas Cartwright. The fabric was damp, though the room was bone dry. That night, I again stayed in the house. At 3 o'clock, I woke shivering. The very boards seemed frozen. Then came the sound of laughter, bright, childlike, impossibly close. The cradle rocked violently. I sat paralyzed. And then, in the window, 2 pale faces appeared, identical, staring inward. I blinked. They were gone. By dawn, I knew I could not endure another night there. Yet the truth hovered so near. In the last official document I uncovered, a constable's letter, the words were stark. The Cartwright home is to be sealed. No child must enter. Locals insist the brothers' souls did not rest, but still seek each other. On the 3rd day, I finally found the man I had long sought, Reverend George Fletcher, Jr., grandson of the pastor who had visited the Cartwright farm in 1834. He lived near Chillicothe and kept his grandfather's diaries. We sat on his porch as he leafed through a worn volume and read aloud. March 24, Elijah came late at night, eyes red, hands trembling. Said the first son had died at dawn, but the second neither slept nor ate nor closed his eyes. Begged me to come and pray. I agreed. The entry continued. Fletcher and 2 neighbors rode out near midnight. Shutters closed, yet lamplight glowed within. Sarah Cartwright sat on the floor cradling the second child. The infant made no sound, but its eyes were wide. I prayed, the pastor wrote, and suddenly the child laughed. The laugh was strange, too grown for a babe. Sarah screamed, and the lamp went out. In the dark, we heard footsteps, as if someone walked across the boards. When the light was struck again, the child lay on the floor, arms outstretched toward the door. Red marks ranged his neck as if held down by force. Elijah cried he could bear it no longer. We lifted the infant to the cradle. I prayed till sunrise. The child grew still, as if asleep, but his eyes never closed. At dawn, his breath ceased. Sarah shed no tear. She only said, "Now they are together." I sat in silence, absorbing this. Fletcher Jr. said softly, "Within a week they left the house. Sarah took ill and died in June that year. Elijah went west and nothing more was heard of him." When I next visited the Cartwright house, the carved circle and cross beneath the window had blackened, as if charred. That evening, while gathering my notes, I heard a faint tapping from inside the wall. I pressed my ear close. The knocks repeated, 3 short, 2 long. I jotted the sequence. It recurred again and again like a code. Next day, I showed Mary Lawson. She brought an old notebook of witness statements. One entry read, "That night we heard strange knocking, like telegraph signals, but the telegraph did not yet exist in the county." Rumors clung to the Cartwright house for decades. In 1842, it was sold, but the buyer vanished 3 days after moving in. Through the 1850s, it stood empty. In 1871, settlers from Ohio occupied it, but within a month they fled, leaving furniture behind. I lingered in the house until evening. Once more, a chill filled the rooms, as if the walls breathed. At sunset, I noticed the shadows of the furniture lay at unnatural angles, not matching my lantern's flame. And then I saw them, 2 child-sized silhouettes on the wall, though nothing stood before it. They clasped hands. A heartbeat later, they were gone. I fled, but at the doorway glanced back. The cradle swayed of its own accord. Back at the inn, I sat up late over my notes. The pieces formed a grim picture. 2 lives bound so tightly that death pulled one into the grave with the other. A family shut inside their home, shutters barred, while the church removed mirrors and performed rites of cleansing. Witnesses who saw things they refused to describe. In the morning, I rode to the cemetery where records said Robert and Thomas were buried, but at their spot lay only 2 low, nameless stones. Upon each was carved the same symbol, a circle with a cross. I touched one slab. It was icy cold, despite the hot day. And in the silence, faint at first, I heard it, a scratching from beneath the earth. I stumbled back, but the sound grew louder, rhythmic, like knocking from below. 3 short, 2 long, the same signal I had heard in the house. I stood frozen until it ceased, as suddenly as it began. On my final visit to the Cartwright house, I resolved to leave things as they were. I placed on the table my notes, the crucifix, and the embroidered cloth. At the door, I turned. 2 silhouettes glowed faintly on the wall beneath the window. This time, they did not vanish. They stood hand in hand, gazing at me. One tilted its head, almost a nod. The cradle creaked softly. I fled without locking the door. Later, in Maysville, they told me the house had burned in the night. No flames were seen, but by dawn, only a blackened frame remained. No firemen were called. The house seemed to decide to erase itself. My papers survived. I had taken them with me, yet some pages turned black and illegible, though fire had never touched them. Even now, I sometimes hear that same rhythm, 3 short, 2 long, sometimes in the night, sometimes in a hushed library. Recently, I read a note in the local press. A housing complex is planned on the former Cartwright property. Workers complain of strange noises at night. I do not know who will dare live there. I know only this. If one listens very carefully in the silence before dawn, one may hear something rocking and the faint stretching of 2 small shadows toward each other. Somewhere far off, a cradle creaks. In distant 1834 in Kentucky, an event took place still wrapped in mystery and dread. The story of the Cartwright twins shook the local community, yet documents and testimonies only multiplied the questions. Born identical beyond belief, bound together in a way physicians could not explain, they became a legend of horror. This chronicle gathers old pages, yellow newspapers, and eyewitness accounts still preserved in archives, records that radiate the same uneasy sense of something sinister and unexplained. The narrative begins with the discovery of a clipping about a strange death, then follows the researcher's descent into events surrounding children who seemed not to obey the usual laws of life and death. He visits houses, questions elders, reads diaries, church records, and medical notes, every scrap that might shed light on a story that has remained unsolved for nearly 2 centuries. With each revelation, tension builds. The story intertwines with rumor and superstition. Mirrors vanish from homes, cradles rock without cause, and nights resound with cries and shadows that should not exist. Every testimony adds weight to the sense that something more than human memory binds this house and these children. The tale carries the reader through archives, dark rooms, graveyards, and silent streets where the past presses against the present. The investigator encounters phenomena that raise more questions than they answer, flames that both exist and do not, objects buried under floorboards, a code of knocks repeating through the years. The climax offers no tidy resolution, only the sense that some mysteries refuse to fade. The cemetery where the twins were buried still bear nameless stones with the same circle cross symbol. Every sound, every shadow, every mark hints that the story continues across centuries, echoing even into our own time. This account does not solve the riddle. It leaves the reader with the suspicion that reality and myth, history and haunting may overlap more closely than we cared to admit. Some stories, even when meticulously recorded, remain incomprehensible. Only the most attentive will glimpse the hidden details, suggesting the tale is unfinished, that its echo still stirs in abandoned houses, in graveyards, and in Kentucky's night wind.
A mystery unsolved by science, untamed by time, still whispers on these pages.